Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Life Unraveled. Detective Ray Maddox had built his life like a fortress, methodical, impenetrable, and designed to protect what mattered most. At 38, he commanded respect in the Philadelphia Police Department's Major Crimes Unit, where his reputation for never letting a case go cold had earned him both admiration and fear from criminals across the city. His analytical mind, honed by 15 years of police work, could dissect a crime scene like a surgeon, finding patterns others missed. But tonight, staring at his sleeping 9-year-old son Tommy through the tense mesh window, Ray felt something he rarely experienced: peace. The Pocono Mountains stretched endlessly around their campsite, and for the first time in months, work felt like a distant memory. "Dad, you awake?" Tommy's voice was barely a whisper. "Yeah, buddy. Can't sleep. I keep thinking about Mom." Tommy's words hung in the cool mountain air. "When's she coming back from her conference?" Ray's jaw tightened slightly. Lisa's marketing conferences had become increasingly frequent over the past 6 months. As a successful real estate agent, she claimed these events were crucial for her career growth. But Ray's investigative instincts had begun to whisper warnings he didn't want to hear. "She'll be back Sunday night," Ray replied, forcing warmth into his voice. "Just you and me until then, soldier." The next morning brought pristine wilderness and the kind of father-son bonding Ray craved. They hiked the mountain trails, Tommy chattering excitedly about everything from rock formations to bird calls. For a few precious hours, Ray forgot about the nagging suspicions that had been eating at him. Lisa Maddox had been the golden girl of Riverside High School, prom queen, valedictorian, and the daughter of successful businessman Robert Sinclair. She'd married Ray when he was still a rookie cop with big dreams and bigger ambitions. For the first 8 years of their marriage, they'd been the perfect couple: successful careers, a beautiful home in the suburbs, and Tommy, who'd completed their picture-perfect family. But perfection, Ray had learned, was often just an illusion waiting to shatter. The changes had been subtle at first. Lisa started working late more frequently, her phone always face down during dinner, and she'd become distant in ways that went beyond the normal ebb and flow of a long marriage. When she began taking overnight trips for work, Ray's cop instinct started screaming, but his heart wanted to trust the woman he'd loved for over a decade. "Dad, look!" Tommy's excited voice snapped Ray back to the present. They'd reached a scenic overlook, and the valley spread below them like a green carpet. "It's like we're on top of the world." Ray smiled, watching his son's face light up with wonder. Whatever storms were brewing at home, he'd protect Tommy from them. Some betrayals were unforgivable, but a child's innocence was sacred. That evening, as they roasted marshmallows over their campfire, Tommy grew unusually quiet. Ray noticed the boy glancing toward the tree line with an expression he couldn't read. "Everything okay, champ?" "Dad," Tommy hesitated, poking at the fire with a stick. "Do you think Mom loves us?" The question hit Ray like a physical blow. "Of course she does. Why would you ask that? Sometimes I hear her on the phone at night. She sounds different, happy in a way she doesn't sound with us anymore." Ray felt ice form in his stomach. His 9-year-old son had noticed what Ray had been trying to deny for months. Children, he knew from his police work, often saw truths adults try to hide. "People have different voices for different situations," Ray said carefully. "It doesn't mean anything." But as Tommy nodded and returned to his marshmallow, Ray's mind was already racing. When they returned home, he'd start doing what he should have done months ago: investigating. Because if Lisa was betraying their family, if she was destroying the life they'd built together, there would be consequences. Ray Maddox didn't forgive betrayal. He never had, and he never would. Chapter 2. The Morning That Changed Everything. Ray woke to the sound of his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Sunlight filtered through the tense orange fabric, and for a moment, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The sleeping bag beside him was empty. "Tommy," his voice cut through the morning silence. No response. Ray bolted upright, his police training kicking in instantly. Tommy's sleeping bag was cold. He'd been gone for a while. Ray grabbed his jacket and burst from the tent, scanning the campsite. Their fire had died to cold ashes, and there was no sign of his son. Tommy. Ray's voice echoed through the forest, panic clawing at his chest. This was every parent's nightmare, made worse by Ray's knowledge of what could happen to children who wandered into the wilderness alone. He forced himself to think like a cop. Tommy was smart and cautious. He wouldn't have wandered far without reason. Ray studied the ground around their campsite until he found what he was looking for: small footprints leading toward the dense tree line on the eastern side of their camp. The trail was easier to follow than Ray expected. Tommy had walked with purpose, not the meandering path of a lost child. Broken twigs and disturbed leaves marked his passage as clearly as breadcrumbs. But where was he going and why? After 20 minutes of following the trail, Ray heard it, the sound of his son's voice, speaking quietly to someone. Relief flooded through him, followed immediately by confusion. Who could Tommy be talking to out here? Ray crept forward, using skills he'd learned in tactical training to move silently through the underbrush. When he finally spotted Tommy, the sight made his blood run cold. His son stood in a small clearing, staring at an old, dilapidated cabin that looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The structure leaned precariously to one side, its roof partially collapsed and windows boarded over. Weeds and young trees grew through gaps in the foundation, and the whole building looked ready to collapse at any moment. But it was Tommy's posture that sent alarm bells ringing in Ray's head. His son stood perfectly still, as if he'd been there many times before, as if this place held some terrible familiarity. "What are you doing?" Ray yelled, bursting from the tree line. Tommy spun around, his eyes wide with what looked like fear, but not fear of being caught. Fear of something else entirely. "Daddy." Tommy's voice was small and strange. "This is where Mommy bring me when you away on business trips." The words hit Ray like a sledgehammer. He stared at his son, then at the cabin, his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. Lisa had been bringing Tommy here? To this place that looked like it belonged in a horror movie? "What do you mean, buddy?" Ray kept his voice level, though every instinct screamed at him to grab his son and run. "She said it was our special secret place," Tommy whispered. "She said I could never tell you because it would make you sad." Ray's vision blurred with rage. Lisa had been manipulating their son, using him to keep secrets, bringing him to this godforsaken place for reasons Ray was only beginning to imagine. He approached the cabin slowly, Tommy trailing behind him. The front door hung askew on rusted hinges, and Ray could see inside through the gaps. What he saw there made him understand why his son looked so frightened. The interior had been cleaned and furnished. Not recently, but recently enough. There was a sleeping bag in one corner, some basic camping supplies, and scattered around the main room were items that made Ray's blood boil. Women's clothing, men's clothing, empty wine bottles, and photographs. Photographs of Lisa with a man Ray didn't recognize. Photographs of them together in ways that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. And worse, photographs that showed Tommy in the background of some shots, playing alone outside while the adults were inside. Ray pulled out his phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. "This is Detective Ray Maddox, badge number 47821, he said when the dispatcher answered. "I need to report a crime scene at the following coordinates." As he provided the location details, his mind was already working through the implications. Lisa hadn't just been cheating on him. She'd been using their son as cover, bringing him to witness her betrayal, making him complicit in the destruction of their family. Some betrayals were unforgivable. This was beyond forgiveness. This was war. Chapter 3. The investigation begins. The next 3 hours passed in a blur of uniformed officers, crime scene technicians, and evidence collection. Ray's colleagues from the Major Crimes Unit arrived within 40 minutes, led by his partner, Detective Angela Torres, a sharp-eyed woman who'd worked with Ray for 5 years and knew him well enough to recognize the controlled fury burning behind his professional demeanor. "Ray, you need to step back from this," Angela said quietly as they watched the techs photograph the cabin's interior. "Let us handle it. Like hell I will." Ray's voice was granite. "This is my family they've destroyed." Inside the cabin, The evidence told a story that made Ray's stomach churn. The crime scene photographers documented everything. The makeshift bedroom, the wine bottles with 2 sets of fingerprints, the photographs scattered across a makeshift table, and most damning of all, a journal hidden beneath the floorboards. Ray recognized Lisa's handwriting immediately. The entries dated back 8 months, documenting her affair with someone named Cole Brandenburg. But as Ray read over the crime scene text's shoulder, he realized this was far more complex than a simple adultery case. "She's been planning this," Ray muttered, reading entry after entry detailing Lisa's growing resentment of their marriage, her calculations about divorce settlements, and her strategizing about how to gain maximum custody of Tommy while minimizing Ray's parental rights. Angela peered at the journal. "Look at this entry from 3 months ago." Ray read aloud. "Cole says if we can prove Ray is unstable, we could get full custody. He thinks Ray's job makes him a risk to Tommy. We just need the right evidence." The implications hit Ray like a freight train. Lisa and her lover hadn't just been conducting an affair. They'd been systematically planning to destroy his relationship with his son. Every late night, every suspicious phone call, every conference had been part of a calculated campaign to reshape their lives according to their desires. "Who's Cole Brandenburg?" Angela asked, pulling out her phone to run the name through police databases. "Never heard of him," Ray replied, but his mind was already cataloging every detail of this place, every piece of evidence, every angle of their betrayal. His years as a detective had taught him that revenge was a dish best served with meticulous planning. Tommy sat in the back of a police cruiser, wrapped in a blanket and sipping hot chocolate from a thermos one of the officers had provided. Ray's heart broke seeing his son's confusion and fear, but it also fueled his determination. Whatever Lisa and her lover had planned, whatever game they thought they were playing, they'd made one critical error. They'd involve his child. Angela returned from her phone call with information that made Ray's blood run cold. Cole Brandenburg, 34, divorced, works as a personal trainer at an upscale gym in Chestnut Hill. No criminal record, but here's the interesting part. He filed for bankruptcy 2 years ago and has been living in a rental property owned by, guess who? Lisa's father. Ray finished grimly. Robert Sinclair had always disapproved of Ray's blue-collar background, despite his success in law enforcement. If he was helping finance his daughter's affair, it meant this betrayal ran deeper than just Lisa's individual choices. The crime scene team finished their work by early afternoon, and Ray was finally allowed to take Tommy home. During the drive down the mountain, his son was unusually quiet, staring out the window with an expression that seemed far too mature for his 9 years. "Dad," Tommy's voice was small. "Am I in trouble for not telling you about the cabin?" Ray pulled over at a scenic overlook and turned to face his son. "Tommy, listen to me very carefully. You're not in trouble. You did nothing wrong. Sometimes adults make very bad choices, and they try to make children keep secrets about those choices. But you're not responsible for what the adults did. Is Mom going to go to jail?" The question hung in the air between them. Ray could see in his son's eyes a heartbreaking mixture of fear, confusion, and something that looked like relief. How long had Tommy been carrying the weight of these secrets? "I don't know yet," Ray answered honestly. "But I promise you this, whatever happens, I will protect you. No one will ever use you to hurt our family again." As they continued the drive home, Ray's mind was already formulating plans. Lisa and Cole thought they were playing a game where they held all the cards. They thought they could manipulate his son, destroy his marriage, and walk away with everything they wanted. They were about to learn what happened when someone tried to outmaneuver a man who'd spent 15 years studying the criminal mind. Ray Maddox had never lost a case he'd chosen to pursue personally. He didn't plan to start now. This was just the beginning. Chapter 4, The Enemy Revealed. Ray's house felt like a crime scene when they returned Sunday evening. Every familiar object, family photos, Lisa's coffee mug still in the sink, Tommy's art projects on the refrigerator, seemed tainted by the knowledge of what had been happening behind his back. He moved through the rooms like a stranger, seeing his own life through the lens of betrayal. Tommy went to bed early, emotionally exhausted from the weekend's revelations. As Ray tucked him in, his son grabbed his hand with surprising strength. "Dad, will you stay until I fall asleep?" "Of course, buddy." Ray sat in the chair beside Tommy's bed, watching his son's face relax into sleep. But his mind was racing, planning, calculating. He'd spent the afternoon making phone calls to contacts throughout the city, private investigators, fellow cops, people who owed him favors from past cases. By the time Lisa returned from her conference, Ray would know everything there was to know about Cole Brandenburg and the web of deception they'd woven around his family. Lisa's key turned in the front door at exactly 9:47 p.m. Ray had been timing her arrivals for months without realizing it. Another unconscious investigative habit. She entered with the false brightness of someone carrying a guilty conscience, dropping her overnight bag by the door with practiced casualness. "How was the camping trip?" she called out, hanging her coat in the closet. Ray emerged from the kitchen, 2 cups of coffee in his hands, their old evening ritual from happier times. He offered her one with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Eventful," he said simply. Lisa accepted the coffee, and Ray studied her face as she took her first sip. Even knowing what he knew, she was still beautiful, the same woman he'd fallen in love with 12 years ago. But now he could see the subtle signs he'd been missing. The way she avoided direct eye contact, the slight tremor in her hands, the practiced nature of her casual demeanor. "Tommy have fun?" she asked. "He learned some interesting things about family secrets," Ray replied, watching her reaction carefully. A micro-expression flickered across Lisa's face, fear quickly suppressed. "Oh, what kind of secrets?" "The kind that involve abandoned cabins in the woods." The coffee mug slipped from Lisa's hands, shattering on the hardwood floor. Coffee splashed across her shoes and the floor, but she stood frozen, staring at Ray with eyes that had gone wide with panic. "I don't know what you're talking about," she whispered. Ray pulled out his phone and showed her the first photograph the crime scene team had taken. The interior of the cabin with its makeshift bedroom and scattered evidence of 2 lovers' meetings. "Cole Brandenburg," Ray said quietly. 34 years old, personal trainer, bankrupt, living in property owned by your father. "Should I continue?" Lisa's face crumpled, and for a moment, Ray saw the woman he'd once loved fighting with the stranger she'd become. But only for a moment. "How dare you spy on me?" she hissed, her fear transforming instantly into anger. "How dare you follow me and invade my privacy?" The audacity of her response hit Ray like a physical blow. Even caught red-handed, even knowing she'd been using their son as cover for her betrayal, she was trying to make him the villain. "I didn't follow you," Ray said with deadly calm. "Our son led me to your secret place. The same son you've been dragging into your affair for months, making him keep secrets, using him as your alibi while you destroyed our family. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think." Ray's voice cut through her protests like a blade. "I've read your journal, Lisa. I know about your plans to frame me as an unfit father. I know about Cole's bankruptcy and your father's involvement. I know everything." Lisa's mask finally slipped completely. The woman standing in his living room bore little resemblance to the person he'd married. Her eyes held a coldness he'd never seen before, a calculating cruelty that made him wonder how long she'd been pretending to be someone else. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into," she said softly. "This isn't just about an affair, Ray. This is about rebuilding my life without the anchor of a husband who'll never be more than a small-town cop with small-town dreams. And our son? What was he in your grand plans? Tommy deserves better than growing up watching his mother settle for mediocrity." Ray felt something cold and final settle in his chest. This wasn't the heat of passion or temporary insanity. This was calculated betrayal, planned over months, with his child used as a weapon against him. "Get out," he said quietly. "This is my house, too. Get out now, or I'll arrest you for child endangerment and conspiracy." The evidence team found enough in that cabin to support both charges. Lisa stared at him for a long moment, and Ray could see her mind working, calculating, trying to find an angle she could use. But 15 years of police work had taught him to recognize when someone realized they were trapped. "This isn't over," she said, grabbing her purse and heading for the door. "No," Ray agreed. "It's just beginning." After she left, Ray stood in his living room, surrounded by the shattered remnants of what he'd thought was his life. But instead of despair, he felt something else, a cold, clean fury that his years in law enforcement had taught him to channel into action. Lisa and Cole had declared war on his family. They'd used his son as a weapon and planned to destroy his relationship with the person who mattered most to him in the world. They were about to discover that Ray Maddox wasn't just a small-town cop. He was a man who'd spent his career learning how to dismantle criminal enterprises, and he'd never met a puzzle he couldn't solve or an enemy he couldn't outmaneuver. The game was on. Chapter 5, Allies and Assets. Monday morning brought Ray's first day off in 3 months, a sick leave he'd arranged with his captain under the guise of dealing with a family emergency. It wasn't technically a lie. This was definitely an emergency, just not the kind his department would expect him to handle through official channels. He dropped Tommy at school with instructions to call him immediately if anyone other than Ray tried to pick him up. His son's quiet, "Okay, Dad," and tight hug told Ray that Tommy understood more about their situation than a 9-year-old should have to. Ray's first stop was downtown Philadelphia, to the office of Marcus Webb, a private investigator who'd worked with the police department on several high-profile cases. Webb was expensive, discreet, and had a reputation for finding information that others couldn't, or wouldn't, uncover. "Ray Maddox," Webb said, rising from behind his desk with a knowing smile. "I was wondering when you'd show up. Word travels fast in our business. What have you heard? That you've got personal problems that are about to become very public problems." Webb gestured to a chair across from his desk. "I also heard you might need the kind of help that stays off official records." Ray had worked with Webb on a corruption case 2 years earlier and had been impressed by the man's thoroughness and absolute discretion. If anyone could help him build an airtight case against Lisa and Cole, it was Webb. "I need everything," Ray said, sliding a photograph of Cole Brandenburg across the desk. "Financial records, employment history, criminal background, personal relationships, medical records if you can get them legally. Everything that explains how a bankrupt personal trainer ended up orchestrating the destruction of a cop's family." Webb studied the photograph. "Cole Brandenburg. I actually know this guy's story. He was married to money once, rich wife, fancy house in the suburbs, the whole package. Then she caught him cheating, and her daddy's lawyers ate him alive in the divorce. Lost everything, including custody of his kid. He has a child? Had. His ex-wife remarried some tech millionaire and moved to California. Brandenburg hasn't seen his daughter in over a year." Webb leaned back in his chair. "Guy like that, losing his meal ticket and his kid, that creates a special kind of desperation." Ray felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Cole wasn't just Lisa's lover. He was someone who'd already lost a family and was trying to build a new one using pieces stolen from Ray's life. "There's something else," Webb continued. "Brandenburg's been seen around town with people who have interesting reputations. Not criminals exactly, but the kind of people who know how to make problems disappear for the right price." "What kind of problems?" "The kind that involve custody battles, character assassination, evidence that might mysteriously disappear from police files." Webb's expression was grim. "Ray, I think your wife and her boyfriend aren't just planning to steal your kid. I think they're planning to frame you for something that'll make sure you never see him again." Ray's blood turned to ice. "What do you mean?" Webb pulled out a thick file and spread several photographs across his desk. They showed Cole at various locations around the city, meeting with people Ray recognized from his years in law enforcement. Not criminals, but the gray area operators who worked just inside the law's boundaries. "This guy here," Webb pointed to a photograph showing Cole shaking hands with a thin, nervous-looking man outside a coffee shop, "is Danny Torres. He specializes in creating false evidence for divorce cases. This woman," he indicated another photo, "is Sarah Chun, former cop turned private security. She's been known to help people disappear evidence when the price is right." "They're building a case against me," Ray realized. "More than that. Based on what I'm seeing, they're planning to plant evidence that'll make you look like a dirty cop. Maybe drug money, maybe stolen evidence, maybe both. Something that'll not only cost you custody, but put you in prison." Ray stared at the photographs, his mind racing through the implications. Lisa and Cole weren't just trying to steal his family. They were trying to destroy his life completely, ensuring he'd never be able to fight back. But they made a critical error. They were playing games with a man who'd spent 15 years learning how to think like a criminal, who had resources they couldn't imagine, and who had absolutely nothing left to lose except his son. "I need something else," Ray said, pulling out his wallet. "I need you to find everything you can about Robert Sinclair's business dealings. Lisa's father is financing this operation, and I want to know why." Webb's eyes lit up with interest. "The real estate mogul? Now that's interesting. Sinclair's been skating on thin ice for years. City contracts that smell like insider trading, development deals that violate zoning laws, the kind of wealth that comes from knowing which palms to grease. You think he's dirty? I think he's the kind of man who'd do anything to protect his reputation and his money. If his daughter's marriage to a cop is creating problems for his business interests, he might be willing to invest heavily in making those problems disappear." Ray stood up, his mind already formulating the next phase of his plan. Lisa and Cole thought they were playing chess, but they just revealed they were actually playing against someone who'd learned the game from the criminals he'd spent his career catching. "How long do you need?" Ray asked. "Give me a week. Maybe less if you're willing to pay for expedited service. Money's no object. But Webb, this has to be absolutely clean. Whatever we find, whatever we do with it, it has to be legally bulletproof. I'm not just fighting for my marriage anymore. I'm fighting for my son." Webb nodded grimly. "Understood. And Ray, watch your back. People like Brandenburg and Sinclair don't just destroy lives. They eliminate obstacles. You've already proven you're not going to roll over and disappear. That makes you dangerous to them." As Ray left Webb's office, he felt the familiar cold clarity that came when a difficult case finally started making sense. Lisa and Cole had started this war thinking they were facing a heartbroken husband. Instead, they'd awakened something far more dangerous. A detective with unlimited motivation and 15 years of experience hunting people who thought they were smarter than the law. The hunter had become the hunted, and they didn't even know it yet. Chapter 6. The Trap Takes Shape. By Friday, Ray's world had been transformed into a battleground where every conversation was recorded, every meeting was surveilled, and every piece of evidence was carefully cataloged for the war he knew was coming. Webb's investigation had revealed depths of betrayal that even Ray's cynical cop instincts hadn't anticipated. The first blow came from an unexpected source. Tommy's school counselor, Mrs. Anderson, called Ray at work with concerns about his son's emotional state and home environment. When Ray arrived at the school that afternoon, he discovered that someone had been feeding the counselor carefully crafted lies about his increasingly erratic behavior and concerning statements about violence that Tommy had allegedly made. "Mr. Maddox," Mrs. Anderson said carefully, "Tommy mentioned that you've been very angry lately, that you've been talking about making people pay for hurting your family. We're concerned about the home environment." Ray felt his jaw clench. Lisa and Cole were already moving, using his own son's innocent words to build their case against him. But Ray had been expecting this. Webb's investigation had revealed that character assassination through a child's school records was one of Cole's girlfriend's specialties. "Mrs. Anderson, I appreciate your concern," Ray said calmly, "but I think there might be some misunderstanding about the context of Tommy's comments. My wife and I are going through some marital difficulties, and I've been explaining to Tommy that sometimes adults have to face consequences for their choices. Perhaps that's what he was referring to." What Ray didn't mention was that he'd been recording every conversation with Tommy for the past week, ensuring he had evidence of exactly what had been said and in what context. Lisa and Cole could play games with his words, but they couldn't change digital recordings. The second blow came that evening, when Ray discovered that someone had been through his house while he was at work. Nothing was missing, but small items had been moved, just enough to let him know that his home had been violated. His service weapon, locked in a department-approved gun safe, showed signs that someone had attempted to access it. Ray's phone rang as he was documenting the break-in. Webb's voice was tight with urgency. "Ray, we've got problems. I've been monitoring Brandenburg and your wife, and they're moving faster than expected. Tomorrow night, they're meeting with someone who specializes in planting evidence in police officers' homes." "What kind of evidence?" the kind that would suggest you're dealing drugs on the side. Enough to trigger an internal affairs investigation and immediate suspension. Combined with the school's concerns about Tommy's welfare, it would be enough to get emergency custody transferred to your wife. Ray felt the walls closing in, but instead of panic, he felt the cold satisfaction of a hunter whose prey had finally revealed itself completely. Where's the meeting? Brandenburg's apartment, 8 p.m. tomorrow. But Ray, you can't just bust in there. They're being careful, keeping everything legal enough that even if they get caught, the damage to your reputation would already be done. I'm not planning to bust in anywhere, Ray said quietly. I'm planning something much better. The next 24 hours were a carefully choreographed dance of surveillance, counter-surveillance, and strategic positioning. Ray called in favors from every contact he'd made in 15 years of police work, assembling a network of observers and evidence gatherers that would make the FBI proud. At 7:45 p.m. on Saturday, Ray sat in an unmarked surveillance van 3 blocks from Cole Brandenburg's apartment, surrounded by recording equipment and 3 off-duty cops who'd volunteered their time after learning what Lisa and Cole were planning to do to his family. Target 1 approaching the building. Officer Maria Santos reported from her position across the street. Lisa Maddox, carrying what appears to be evidence bags. Target 2 already inside, added Detective Bill Chun from his post in the building's parking garage. Brandenburg's been preparing for this meeting all day. At exactly 8 p.m., a third figure appeared. Danny Torres, the evidence-planting specialist Webb had identified. Ray watched through high-powered binoculars as the man entered Brandenburg's building carrying a briefcase that likely contained enough planted evidence to destroy Ray's career. But Ray wasn't planning to stop them. He was planning to let them complete their crime while documenting every second of it. All units, maintain positions, Ray said into his radio. Let them finish what they came to do. For the next 90 minutes, Ray's team recorded everything. Lisa's arrival, the meeting between all 3 conspirators, and most importantly, Torres leaving with empty hands while Brandenburg and Lisa left with packages that clearly contained the planted evidence they planned to place in Ray's home. As the conspirators went their separate ways, Ray felt the cold satisfaction of a plan coming together perfectly. They thought they were about to destroy him, but instead, they just provided him with ironclad evidence of conspiracy, evidence tampering, and attempted frame-up of a police officer. Phase 1 complete, Ray said into his radio. Now we see how far they're really willing to go. But even as his team began following the conspirators to their next moves, Ray's mind was already working on Phase 2. Because stopping Lisa and Cole from framing him was only the beginning of what he had planned for them. They tried to steal his son and destroy his life. Now they were going to learn what happened when someone tried to outmaneuver a man who'd spent his career taking down people who thought they were untouchable. The real trap was just beginning to close. Chapter 7, The Web Titans. Sunday morning brought the sound of sirens to Ray's neighborhood. At exactly 6:47 a.m., 3 patrol cars pulled into his driveway, their lights flashing as uniformed officers approached his front door with what appeared to be a search warrant. Ray answered the door in his bathrobe, playing the role of confused and innocent husband perfectly. He'd been expecting this visit. His surveillance team had tracked Lisa and Cole as they planted evidence in his garage the night before, and he'd watched them make the anonymous tip to internal affairs that would trigger this search. Detective Maddox, Sergeant Williams, said formally, "We have a warrant to search these premises for suspected narcotics and related paraphernalia." "Of course," Ray replied, stepping aside. "I'm not sure what this is about, but please search wherever you need to." What the search team found was exactly what Lisa and Cole had planted. 2 bags of cocaine hidden in Ray's toolbox, along with a substantial amount of cash wrapped in evidence bags from the police department. To any observer, it looked like a police detective had been stealing drugs from crime scenes and selling them on the side. But what the search team also found, hidden in places Lisa and Cole didn't know about, were the high-definition cameras Ray had installed throughout his property. Cameras that had recorded every moment of the break-in, every second of evidence being planted, and every face of the people involved in framing him. "This is very serious," Detective Sergeant Williams said as the evidence was bagged and tagged. You'll need to surrender your weapon and badge pending the internal affairs investigation. Ray complied with appropriate confusion and concern, even as his phone buzzed with a text from Webb. Package delivered. Opening tomorrow. The package was a complete dossier on Cole Brandenburg, Robert Sinclair, and their network of associates, along with every piece of evidence Webb had gathered about their conspiracy. Tomorrow, copies would be delivered simultaneously to the district attorney's office, the FBI's Public Corruption Unit, and the Philadelphia Inquirer's investigative reporting team. But Ray's most important stop was Tommy's school, where he arrived to find his son already packed and ready to leave with Lisa, who'd apparently gained emergency custody based on the morning's drug bust. "I'm sorry, Mr. Maddox," the principal said uncomfortably, "but given the circumstances, we have to follow the court order." Ray knelt down to Tommy's level, his heart breaking at the confusion and fear in his son's eyes. "Tommy, I need you to remember what we talked about. No matter what anyone tells you, no matter what you hear, I love you, and I'm going to fix this." "Okay." Tommy nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Are you really a bad guy, Dad?" "No, buddy, I'm not. And very soon, everyone will know the truth." As Ray watched Lisa drive away with his son, he felt the last vestiges of mercy leave his heart. They'd crossed the final line by using Tommy as a weapon against him. What happened next wouldn't just be about clearing his name. It would be about ensuring that Lisa and Cole never had the chance to hurt another family the way they'd hurt his. Monday morning brought chaos to Lisa's carefully constructed world. Webb's dossier had been delivered to every relevant authority, and the evidence was overwhelming. Financial records showing payments from Robert Sinclair to the evidence planning specialist, photographs of secret meetings, recorded conversations discussing the frame-up, and most damning of all, security footage showing Lisa and Cole planting drugs in Ray's garage. By noon, Cole Brandenburg was in federal custody on charges of conspiracy to commit evidence tampering and attempted framing of a police officer. By evening, Lisa had been arrested as well, and Robert Sinclair was facing his own federal investigation for corruption and conspiracy. But Ray's masterstroke came when Webb revealed the depth of his investigation into Cole's background. The man wasn't just a failed personal trainer. He was a serial predator who'd use his access to wealthy women to systematically destroy their marriages and steal their assets. Lisa wasn't his first victim. She was his latest in a string of carefully targeted divorces that had netted him and his associates hundreds of thousands of dollars over the past 3 years. "Your wife thought she was the mastermind," Webb explained as they sat in Ray's living room, Tommy finally home and asleep upstairs. "But she was just another mark." Brandenburg and his crew specialize in identifying unhappy wives with wealthy husbands, seducing them, and then helping them destroy their marriages in ways that maximize the financial settlement. Ray stared at the photographs Webb spread across his coffee table. Images of Cole with at least 6 other women over the past 5 years, all wealthy, all divorced under suspicious circumstances, all of whom had lost substantial assets to men who disappeared shortly after their divorces were finalized. Lisa wasn't having an affair, Ray realized. She was being conned by professionals. And when you started getting close to the truth, they decided to eliminate the threat by framing you and taking your kid. But they made one critical error. They assumed you'd react like a victim instead of like a cop. The final piece of Ray's revenge came when he realized that Lisa's betrayal had been built on lies from the beginning. She hadn't chosen to destroy their family. She'd been manipulated into it by criminals who saw her as nothing more than another source of income. But that didn't change what she'd done to Tommy. It didn't change the months of lies, the manipulation of their son, or the willingness to destroy an innocent child's relationship with his father for money. Some betrayals were too deep for forgiveness, even when they were built on deception. Chapter 8. Justice Served Cold. 6 months later, Ray stood in a federal courtroom watching Cole Brandenburg receive a 15-year sentence for conspiracy, fraud, and racketeering. The investigation Webb had initiated had unraveled an entire network of marriage-for-profit schemes that had destroyed dozens of families across 3 states. Lisa sat in the defendant's chair beside him, no longer the confident woman who'd tried to steal his life. The months of investigation had revealed her true role in the conspiracy. Not the mastermind she believed herself to be, but another victim who'd allowed herself to become a willing participant in her own family's destruction. The court recognizes that Mrs. Maddox may have been initially deceived by Mr. Brandenburg's criminal enterprise, Judge Patricia Hoffman said during sentencing. However, her continued participation in activities designed to frame her husband and manipulate her own child demonstrates a level of calculated cruelty that cannot be overlooked. Lisa received 5 years for her role in the conspiracy, with the possibility of parole in 3 if she testified against other members of Brandenburg's network. Ray felt no satisfaction watching her break down as the sentence was read, only a cold sense of justice being served. Robert Sinclair's involvement had cost him everything. The federal investigation into his business dealings had revealed decades of corruption, bribery, and money laundering. His real estate empire collapsed. His political connections evaporated, and he faced 20 years in federal prison. The man who'd thought he could buy his daughter's way out of an inconvenient marriage had lost everything trying to destroy a cop who'd refused to be intimidated. But Ray's most important victory was the one that happened outside the courtroom. Tommy, after months of therapy and careful reconstruction of his understanding of what had happened, was beginning to heal from the trauma of being used as a weapon against his own father. "Dad," Tommy said as they walked out of the courthouse together, "are you glad Mom's going to jail?" Ray considered the question carefully. "I'm glad that the people who hurt our family are being held responsible for what they did. I'm sad that your mom made choices that led her to this place. But mostly, I'm grateful that you're safe and that we can start building our life together again." Tommy nodded with the serious expression of a child who'd been forced to grow up too quickly. "Will she ever come home?" "Maybe someday, when she served her time and learned from her mistakes. But that's years away, and by then, you'll be old enough to decide for yourself what kind of relationship you want to have with her." As they drove home from the courthouse, Ray reflected on how completely his life had been transformed. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed him had ultimately led to the dismantling of a criminal enterprise that had been destroying families for years. His reputation as a detective had been not only restored but enhanced. The federal prosecutors were already talking about offering him a position with their public corruption unit. But more importantly, he and Tommy were free. Free from the lies, the manipulation, and the toxic influence of people who'd been willing to sacrifice a child's well-being for their own selfish goals. That evening, as Ray tucked Tommy into bed, his son asked the question that had been hanging between them for months. "Dad, do you think you'll ever get married again?" Ray smiled, thinking of Detective Angela Torres, who'd been increasingly present in their lives as both a colleague and something more. "Maybe someday, buddy. But only to someone who understands that you and I are a package deal, and that family loyalty isn't negotiable." "Good," Tommy said firmly, "because I like how things are now. Just us, but better. Just us, but better." Ray couldn't have summarized their new life more perfectly. They'd lost a wife and mother who'd proven herself unworthy of their trust, but they'd gained something more valuable, an unbreakable bond forged in the fire of betrayal and strengthened by their refusal to let anyone destroy what truly mattered. Some men might have chosen forgiveness. Some men might have tried to rebuild what had been broken. But Ray Maddox wasn't some man. He was a man who understood that some betrayals were so fundamental, so cruel in their targeting of innocence, that they demanded not forgiveness but justice. And justice, Ray had learned, was sometimes the most powerful form of love. Chapter 9. New Beginnings. 2 years after the camping trip that changed everything, Ray stood in the backyard of their new house, watching Tommy practice batting with the confidence of a boy who'd learned he could trust the adults in his life to protect him. The house was smaller than their old one, but it was theirs, free from the memories of betrayal and filled with the promise of honest new beginnings. Angela Torres emerged from the kitchen, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the comfortable smile of someone who'd found her place in their unconventional family. She and Ray had married 6 months earlier in a simple ceremony with Tommy as the best man and no guests who hadn't proven their loyalty through fire. "The lawyer called," Angela said, handing Ray his coffee. Lisa's parole hearing is next month. Ray nodded. He'd known this day would come eventually. Lisa had served 3.5 years of her 5-year sentence, and her cooperation with federal prosecutors had earned her consideration for early release. The woman who tried to destroy his family would soon be free to try to rebuild some version of her own life. What did you tell him? Angela asked. That we'll attend the hearing, but we won't oppose her release. She's paid her debt to society, and Tommy deserves the chance to decide for himself what kind of relationship he wants with his mother. Tommy jogged over, sweat beading on his forehead, but grinning with the satisfaction of finally mastering a swing that had been giving him trouble for weeks. Did you see that one, Dad? Perfect contact. I saw it, champ. Getting ready for tryouts next week. Angela's been helping me with my stance. She says I need to keep my eye on the ball longer. Ray watched his son include Angela naturally in the conversation and felt the deep satisfaction of a family that had been rebuilt on honesty instead of convenient lies. Angela had never tried to replace Tommy's mother. Instead, she'd simply proven herself worthy of trust through consistency, honesty, and an absolute commitment to protecting the family they'd all chosen to create together. That evening, after Tommy went to bed, Ray and Angela sat on their porch, watching the sun set over their neighborhood of modest houses filled with families who'd built their lives on a foundation of hard work and genuine affection. Are you worried about Lisa getting out? Angela asked. Ray considered the question seriously. I'm cautious. People don't always learn from their mistakes, and she still has a talent for manipulation. But Tommy's older now, stronger. He understands what really happened, and he's built a life that doesn't depend on her approval or presence. And you? Ray smiled, thinking of the man he'd been before the betrayal. Trusting, perhaps naive, certainly unprepared for the level of calculated cruelty his wife had been capable of. That man was gone, replaced by someone harder, but also more honest about the realities of human nature. I'm exactly where I need to be, he said simply. The next week brought Tommy's baseball tryouts and Ray's promotion to lieutenant in the Major Crimes Unit. Both achievements felt earned rather than given, the result of hard work and perseverance through adversity. Tommy made the team as starting shortstop, and Ray's new position came with both increased responsibility and the chance to mentor younger detectives who were still learning that justice wasn't always served in courtrooms. Cole Brandenburg died in federal prison 3 months before Lisa's release, the victim of violence from other inmates who didn't appreciate men who preyed on families. Ray felt no satisfaction at the news, only a recognition that some people created so much destruction that the world eventually destroyed them in return. Robert Sinclair lived, but in circumstances that would have horrified the man who'd once thought he could buy his way out of any problem. Penniless, friendless, and facing another decade in prison, he'd written Tommy a letter attempting to apologize for his role in destroying the boy's family. Ray had read the letter carefully before deciding that some apologies were too little, too late, and too self-serving to deserve a response. Tommy never even knew his grandfather had tried to reach out. Some protections were permanent. On the day of Lisa's release, Ray and Tommy drove to the prison to pick her up, not as a reunion, but as a civilized conclusion to a chapter that had defined their lives for too long. Lisa emerged from the prison looking older, smaller, and genuinely broken by the consequences of her choices. The conversation during the drive to the halfway house where she'd be living was awkward but necessary. Tommy, now 12 and more perceptive than many adults, asked direct questions about why she'd made the choices she had, whether she understood how those choices had affected him, and what she planned to do differently. Lisa's answers were a mixture of genuine remorse and self-justification that left Ray convinced she still didn't fully understand the magnitude of what she'd done. But Tommy seemed satisfied that he'd been heard, and that was what mattered. Will I see you again? Tommy asked as they dropped her off at the halfway house. If you want to, Lisa replied, but only when you want to, and only in ways that feel safe for you. It was, Ray reflected, perhaps the most honest thing she'd said to their son in years. As they drove home, Tommy was quiet for a long time before speaking. I'm glad we went, but I'm also glad we're going home to Angela. Me too, buddy. Me too. That night, as Ray tucked Tommy into bed, his son asked one final question about the ordeal that had shaped their lives. "Dad, do you ever regret not forgiving Mom?" Ray considered his answer carefully. "Tommy, forgiveness is something you give when someone has truly accepted responsibility for their actions and when continuing to be angry hurts you more than it helps. Your mother chose to betray our family in ways that put you in danger and try to steal your relationship with me. Some betrayals are so fundamental that forgiveness isn't the right response. Justice is. But she's my mom. She is. And if someday she proves that she's truly changed, that she understands what she did wrong, and has become someone trustworthy, then you can decide what kind of relationship you want with her. But you never have to forgive someone just because they're family. Family isn't about blood. It's about loyalty, protection, and love that doesn't come with conditions." Tommy nodded, processing this with the seriousness of a child who'd learned that adults weren't always trustworthy just because they were supposed to be. "I love our family," he said simply. "So do I, champ. So do I." As Ray turned off the lights and headed downstairs, he found Angela waiting for him with a glass of wine and a smile that had become his favorite sight in the world. "How was he?" she asked. "Strong, wise, ready to move forward, like his father." Ray pulled her close, thinking of the journey that had brought them all to this moment. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed him had ultimately led to a life more honest, more purposeful, and more genuinely loving than anything he'd thought possible. Some men forgave. Some men forgot. Some men tried to rebuild what had been broken. But Ray Maddox had chosen a different path. The path of justice, protection, and building something new from the ashes of what had been destroyed. It was a harder path, but it was also the path that had led him to a family built on truth instead of convenient lies. And as he stood in his living room, holding the woman who'd proven herself worthy of his trust while his son slept safely upstairs, Ray knew he'd made the right choice. Some betrayals were unforgivable, but from the ashes of those betrayals, something stronger could always be built. The trap he'd set for his enemies had closed perfectly, but the life he'd built in its aftermath was his greatest victory of all. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.